Hello, you're listening to Got Clutter, Get Organized. I am your host, Janet M. Taylor, and I want to say hello if you're a regular listener and welcome if you're listening for the very first time. I hope you're having a great start to your week. And if those of you who are regular listeners are enjoying this podcast, please leave a review, a comment on whatever platform you are streaming from. So in this episode, I am joined by a fellow podcaster from Australia, Maria of So Organised Style podcast. And she's going to be sharing how, whether you are a quilter, a crafter, a sewer, how you can organize those materials and supplies. And I will also be sharing my product suggestion, app suggestion, repurpose suggestion, and my book suggestion for this week. And my question for this week is, I would like to know about you. Are you a sewer? Are you a quilter? Are you a crafter? Well, I went out there on the internet and I found out just some news and some trends. And of course, this one business owner said I was coming in here to put a close sign up and say close until after the virus because I thought everybody was on lockdown. But he went from selling one machine every 6 months to selling dozens in a month. And as for repairs, he probably gets about 8 machines in. And he says a lot of them are coming from the 40, 50, 60-year-old sewing machines for me to repair and stuff. And he says he's been doing a lot of those. And he said the old technology is what you should look for. The older the better. Newer, lighter machines have a lot of plastic parts which are not made as well and break down more often. But he said those 20 to 30 pound metal mechanisms are the best. It's an old technology he thinks will continue to resurge because once people start sewing, he doesn't think it'll stop. So there's a trend, as you know, there's a trend. So I am here with So Organised Style podcast, and they're from Australia and New Zealand, and they're the first sewing podcast in the community. And you'll hear a range of interviews from the diverse sewing community network. And of course, I have the producer here today, and her name is Maria, and I'm not going to say her last name because I don't want to mess it up, but you'll hear it in the interview. And of course, they occasionally, and occasionally from their Brisbane correspondent, Amy Tuitt, and they collaborate with Socialists, Sew Over 50, and of Australian Sewing Guild, and other sewing friends like Mending Mayhem, Zen Stitching, and Hepic. And you'll also hear from their guests, share their strategies to work through challenges life throws at them. Each guest bravely shares their strategies with their online sewing community. So, without further ado, I want to share with you my interview with Maria of So Organised Style podcast. Well, hello, listeners. I am excited because I am here with Maria Theoharous of So Organized Style podcast. And I wanted her to come because I know a lot of you are quilters, you're crafters, you're sewers, and you probably have a lot of stuff. But also, I just wanted to share about her podcast and how it can benefit you as well. So, Maria, thank you for joining us.
Janet, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really flattered that you asked me.
So before we get started in the tips and strategies, what made you decide to start your podcast?
Well, it all started back in June 2012. So I did some research to convert 150 videos into a podcast for a live show for someone that I was, co-hosting with. I thought, that might be a good idea. But I think at that stage, her mindset was videos, not podcast. So, I granted her that, and that wasn't a problem. She declined. And then I thought, I've done all this research. So, Janet, you know what it's like when you're trying to set up podcasts. And I thought, well, why don't I create my own? So that was kind of the start. And so I listened to some similar podcasts back in the day, like in 2019, and I looked at a couple of things. So, one of the things I was interested in to see, what do people discuss in the sewing realm? And then I looked at the podcasts that were doing really well but stopped, because you sit there and wonder what happened. And then I looked closely at the topics that those podcasts had covered. And really, I compared them to what I could, realistically could contribute to the sewing community, because I'm just one person, never published a book. I did a little bit of, teaching. So, the skill set there is a whole lot different to others who are really, really good in their field. So with COVID making so many people feel isolated last year, I'd started the podcast in August 2019. So I actually changed the podcast to give listeners support on weekdays. So, you all know that, weekdays when you're in isolation looks like every other day. They all look the same. So my podcast aim was to do, instead of publishing twice a month, to publish 3 to 5 times a week during the week, not long, just short bits to motivate sewers. Because you lose your motivation for so many things. And when you love sewing and crafting and quilting, it does stop you. So now I'm really grateful for how my podcast since 2020 April now meets the needs for those who are in sewing community groups, whether it's online or not. So, yeah, I'm very grateful that, I started the podcast for one reason, and now it's actually meant a lot to so many more people.
And you're right, because with COVID, so many people got into sewing, quilting, crafting.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, Maria, what are the challenges that people in those communities face when it comes to stuff? Because I know when I used to do my little dab in crafting, it was like everything. It goes like, oh, I could use this, I could use this. So, what are some of the challenges that they face?
Well, as you know, when you get into a craft or a hobby, you get quite excited. And there are so many little bits, like you said, Janet. So the key thing is to stay organized when you actually are organized. So, okay, let me explain this. So, here are some of my weaknesses when it comes to staying organized. So, being sentimental is a weakness. So, this stops my ability to unclutter my sewing space. And Janet can see it from where she's sitting. So, I keep fabrics in part of my sewing room based on where I bought them from. For example, when we could travel, I've actually got fabrics from the UK, New York, LA, Portland, Vancouver, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide. So I look at those fabrics and I think, oh, yeah, that was then. And so, being sentimental means that it's really hard to get rid of the fabrics that you bought at the time. Okay, so that's one thing. Being creative is also my weakness. So I've been sewing for many, many years, and I started sewing when I was in primary school. So that's around age 10 onwards. So the reality is that I sew anything. So clothes, bags, shoes. Shoes on occasion, not all the time. So my sewing creativity has been supported by fabric retailers like Minerva in the UK, White Tree Fabrics as well in the UK, and Pit Trading here in Sydney. So this brings me to my other weakness in trying to stay organised, is being a supportive person. That's a weakness. And the reason being is I also pattern test for indie pattern designers like Fair Trade in the UK, Pauline Alice Patterns in Spain, and I also check the English translations for Sacotan Patterns in France. So that's a woman who designs bag patterns, very unusual ones. And I won't tell you any of the funny stories where I tried to translate English to French when I was trying to be, back when we started, and it was just totally wrong. The context was just ridiculous. Anyway, that's for another story. So I grew up in a family that started with nothing to their name when mum and dad came to Australia as very young adults in the 1950s. So because of that, it's hard to let go of things because I've come from a background where we had nothing. So buying storage bins is something that I actually struggle with because these are my buying another piece of equipment that may not suit my long-term goals of being uncluttered and having my materials available to me. So to be organized and to stay organized, all of those things are always in my way to be organized. So I'm really sorry, Janet, but they're just the things that I struggle with every day.
But I think you're not alone because, I mean, the sentimental value, and of course, to know that you were in New York, so close to me, Maria, so close, we're only 2 hours away. I can understand it. I mean, you do when you see those patterns or those just, for me, it was always the nice little intricate little things that I would see. I still have a piece of lace, red lace, because red is my favorite color. I love lace. I don't even know when I'm going to use it. As I'm letting everybody know. I just want to keep it. I want to hold on to it. So, I can understand. And also just sometimes when you do come from those backgrounds where you don't have a lot, then when you acquire a lot, you're like, okay, I'm going to keep this stuff. I'm going to hold on to this stuff. So, with that, what are some ways that maybe people are finding to just organize the stuff? Because when you come to quilting and sewing and crafting, there's so much stuff. I mean, you could have like 5 or 10 different scissors in and of itself. So, how do you just organize all of those things?
Um, well, Janet, you shouldn't have said 5 or 10 types of scissors because I probably got about 4 or 5 myself. But look, sorry, they're for different reasons. That's how I'm justifying it. Okay. So, you know, you need to have reasons for being organized as being part of who you are. So, right now, I'm actually trawling through Instagram and I've been following a few hashtags to get ideas to stay organized. So, the ones that I've been following are fabric storage, sewing spaces, sewing room organization, and sewing room. So they're some of the hashtags that I'm using to find ways to stay organized. So I've got some organization happening in my sewing room, but it's not the best. And a few of my sewing friends have actually introduced me to a new Facebook group that provide local products. So I live in Sydney, Australia, and I think when you're looking to stay organized, it's good to find out word of mouth places near you that can provide you with solutions or ways to resolve your not being organized. So one of the groups is called Cleaning and Organizing. That's a Facebook group. And the other one is called the Upcycle It. That's all one word. So that's another group that I found. And they've got some interesting ways that different people have been innovative using what they've got to be organized. So what I'm currently trying to figure out is do I use clear containers? Do I use readable labels? And storage locations that can be reachable for my height and for my sewing space. So clear containers so that I don't have to think, oh, the blue container has this, the red container has that, right? And then readable labels are important because I need to be able to see them. So I'm not going to have a label which is 12-point high. The typeface, we're probably looking at about 80 to 100, depending on, and again, it depends on where it's sitting. So as an example, around my sewing machines, the easy access pieces I have are my threads that I use on the machines. I also have my unpickers and my little snips for cutting threads. And I also have anything that needs to pull through. So when you're doing loops and to pull through something once you've sewn it inside out, they're there as well. And small men's shirt buttons because for the life of me, my husband keeps popping shirts on his popping buttons on his shirts, and for some reason they end up in my sewing room. I don't know how they get here, but I eventually will, mend them. So, you know, that's how I'm looking at staying organized, where I'm finding my ideas to stay organized.
And those are some great ideas because you talked about labels, which is key. Clear is always wonderful because then you can kind of like glance and look and see. You don't have to wonder. And of course, you're also taking your height into consideration, which a lot of times people don't. And then you've got all the things you need accessible close to you. And that's key too. Like you said, those buttons, because you know you're always going to use those buttons. So that is good. So you do have a system. And it's working for you. And that's what I try to tell people anyway. Use something that's going to work for you, nothing that works for somebody else. So Maria, with everything that you do, because of course you shared with me that you did your little walking this morning, and of course you're a wife, and you're a podcaster, and you've got the podcast community. How do you just manage it all?
That's yeah. It's one of those things that is a juggle. So there's organized and then there's organized. And I stay organized as I can. And, when you asked me that question originally, I thought, okay, so what's the priority here? So number one is my day job is the most important because I get paid and I've worked with these people at my, workplace for over 10 years now. So that there are some really strong relationships there. And through lockdown, I think that's kept me quite sane. So that's important to make sure that I deliver on my day job. The weekends are when I catch up on sewing and family events. So lockdown or not, you still have those Zoom calls. If it's someone's birthday, you make sure that you have a gift delivered to them, that sort of thing. Now, before work, as you've just said, I make sure that for an hour I get out and exercise somehow. So that's really good because it sort of grounds me. So then before I leave in the morning for my walk, I actually check for my overnight emails and messages and respond to them right then and there because of the time difference. And I think it's really important that when you've got, people in the sewing community who live all around the world, it's really important to stay connected. And if it just means that 3 minutes, before you leave the house or, when you're tidying up, it's really important because that's a relationship that I think is important to keep. So that's, another thing that I do. Then after work, I'll have, dinner and then work for a couple of hours on podcasting. And that could be, as you know, recordings or updating social media, sound editing, or updating the website. So what keeps me motivated is thinking about the next new sewing project and reading about the various social issues that are taking place in the sewing community, because that's a lot of what the podcast is all about. So since 2019, when I started my podcast, I also try to keep informed and skilled, as you know, Janet, in the podcast industry. So, that's another thing that us as podcasters have to keep on top of. So that way, what's happening across the platforms that we use, the technology, being in podcast chat groups, and Janet, as you know, investing in your own personal skills. And then the other thing is trying to streamline what we do so that the content that we give our listeners is, fun, educational, and worthwhile listening to.
And you're so right about just keeping up with everything as a podcaster. But I love the way you just have like a routine, like you do the exercises, you work, but you got your family time, you got your time with your husband, your podcasting time, your sewing time. So you've got everything nice and planned. So listeners, listen. She's got everything nice and planned and strategic. And that's how you get to do all you get to do. So, Maria, how can listeners connect with you and listen to your podcast, especially the quilters, the sewers, the crafters?
Well, the quickest way to contact me is on Instagram at either my personal Instagram, which is Velosews, that's VELOSEWS, or on So Organised Style podcast Instagram account. So that's organized with an S, not a Z, or on the website, which is www.soulorganizedstylepodcast.com. So it doesn't matter how you try and get in contact with me, I will always get back to you.
And of course, listeners, I always have a direct link to the guest's website on the show page. So, Maria, thank you so much for being a guest.
Janet, thank you so much for having me. And I wish you all the success with your podcast. And listeners, you've got to keep listening to Janet.
Thank you.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episode. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Well, did you enjoy my conversation with Maria? I hope you did. I hope you walked away with something. And if you walked away with a tidbit or strategy or a tip or an idea, please share. You know, you can share your comments on the show page by just clicking a link, and you can leave me a voice, a verbal, so you don't have to worry about typing something in. So now let's transition to Taylor's tip time and organizing those crafts supplies. The first thing you want to do is you want to decide on the purpose of the space. Is it going to be a craft space? Is it going to be a craft space / home office? Or is it going to be craft space / second bedroom for those guests? Number 2, get ideas and a vision. You can do that through Pinterest or other types of platforms. Number 3, clear the space and purge, because 80% of the stuff we keep, we never really reference again. And you might find stuff in there that you don't need. Number 4, get supplies. And then number 5, organize. So those are my tips in this week's Taylor's Tip Time. Now, if you are ready to live an organized life, well, check out my virtual sessions. Have you been working on getting organized and feel that you need someone to guide you from start to finish by providing you with details needed to clear the clutter and get organized? Let's talk so I can share how you can get back on track and get organized with my virtual sessions. Go to my contact page and schedule a 15-minute session with me. Or maybe you just are feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you can't manage all that's happening. Your work, your business, your life. Let me help you. I work with clients so they can get things done without feeling stressed out and create a life so you can have more time to do all that you want to do without feeling overwhelmed. And again, go to my contact page, janetmtaylor.com, and click a link, and let's schedule a 15-minute session. Well, of course, I want to thank you for following me on social media, for your likes, your retweets, your reposts, and of course, please continue to follow me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at Janet the Organizer. That's Janet the Organizer. And of course, I have a Pinterest page, and I have a board specifically for craft organizing. So check that out. And of course, also you can find me on YouTube as well. Well, do you know what time it is? I hear you chanting. It is Toss It Tuesday time. And this time, I want you to consider donating those supplies you no longer use. You know, I used to have all kinds of supplies, craft supplies, sewing supplies, but I didn't use that stuff anymore. So there's a young lady who loves to design clothes, loves to put all finishing touches and maybe give something a new life. So I donated all of my supplies to her. So think about that. Now, my app suggestion, and you, of course, you heard Maria. She said there's an app that'll help you really organize your inventory for your materials, etc. So this app suggestion is called Simple Mind. It analyzes your thoughts and structures them. And it's a unique free layout, allows you to organize your ideas exactly how you want. You can have mind maps, you can have, the list, etc. So this is a great app for you. It's called Simple Mind, so make sure you check it out. And of course, my product suggestion is a wall mount hardware and craft storage cabinet drawer organizer. So this will help you organize all those, cute little pieces that you have. And you can either mount it on the wall, or you can just have it, sitting on top of a shelf, a bookcase, or wherever you find convenient in your creative space. And of course, repurpose. Check out all my repurpose boards. Specifically, of course, I just have repurpose in general, where you can take like materials, and a lot of you already know, you can take materials and just transform into anything you want. So I've got repurpose the office, as well as repurpose the garden. And my book selection for this week is Manage Your Day-to-Day. Build your routine, find your focus, and sharpen your creative mind. Again, manage your day-to-day, build your routine, find your focus, and sharpen your creative mind. And of course, as you know, my product suggestion as well as my book suggestion, you can always find that on the show page, and you can just click the link that'll take you directly to it. And my quote for this week is, creative minds inspire others. So always know that your creative mind inspires the rest of us. So I want to thank you for listening, and be sure to share this podcast with your family, your friends, and on your social media network. And again, let me know you're enjoying listening to this podcast by leaving a review on whichever platform you're listening to. And of course, be sure to visit my website at janetmtaylor.com. And until next time, have a clutter-free day, but most of all, have an organized week. Organization is a quintessential element of a clutter-free life. Join me as we take this journey together. Along the way, we will find the necessary answers to your organizing dilemmas. My name is Janet M. Taylor, and you are listening to Got Clutter, Get Organized.